Leather. It's been with us since the beginning of history. Throughout the ages, humans have relied on leather to provide warmth and protection from the elements. Today's leathers are greatly improved. They're softer, they come in a wide range of colors, and they're much easier to sew. These new developments in leather have influenced fashion. Leather now is used for a wide range of leather garments, and this adaptability allows you to think that anything you can make from fabric, you can make from leather.
The vests we were just looking at were made from a shearling skin like this one. As you can see, it's got a nice, soft plush. Most people put that to the inside so that it's a warm, like a lining. And the outer part of the garment then is the nice natural suede finish that's on the back side of this skin. It makes for a simplified sewing because you don't have to line this garment. And yes, you can sew this on your home sewing machine. It's not a tough skin. The fleece is very soft, the needle goes right through it, and then the skin itself is no thicker than any of these other leathers that we'll be looking at. And the next leather here that I wanted to show you is a cabretta. It's a smooth finished leather. It's often used for skirts. For example, the skirt that I'm wearing is made from a black cabretta. It's decent sized skin, as you can see, and actually it's considered the classic of leather garments. Then we're going to look at a few suedes here. They offer the most versatility. The small skin on top is a lamb skin. It's the softest and the lightest weight of any of the suedes that we have. You can see also that it's a small skin, so you need to be sure and check that you're buying enough of these skins when you buy for your project. You can also see that, like all the other leathers that we looked at, it's got uneven edges. That's because it is a real skin. It comes from an animal. It doesn't come on a bolt. It's a very soft skin. You'll want to make blouses from this, or t-shirts, or halter tops, or swimsuits, something that you want up next to your skin. And it's light enough in its weight that you can wear it year-round, depending on what you make from it, of course. But leather is a natural fiber, and it breathes with you. This next skin is a pig skin. As you can see, it's a much bigger skin. It also comes in the widest range of colors. It's also a very soft skin. Not quite as soft as the lamb skin, but still very soft. It drapes extremely well. As I said, it's got the widest range of colors of any of the leathers that we have, and can be used for virtually any fashion garment that you would want to make, like the top that I'm wearing. And the last skin that we'll look at here in the suedes is a cowhide suede. It's a Vogue split in the Tandy leather line. It's a heavier weight. It's something that you would want to use for a garment that you would wear outdoors, a jacket or a vest, something that would be a little bit more rugged for outdoors. The next thing that we'll talk about is how to prepare a pattern to be used on these irregular shaped skins. For today's project, we've chosen a real simple pattern. It's just a man's vest. The pattern itself comes with 3 pieces, and what I'm going to show you is the way that you need to reproduce one of those pieces. When you're sewing with leather, it's real important that you remember that you don't ever cut through a double thickness. You never cut on the fold. Most patterns come with a piece that will say something like this, cut 2. Or it might say cut on a fold, in which case it would usually be the yoke pattern like this, only it would only be half of it. If it had a cut on fold here, you would draw it again, leave yourself enough overlap that you could tape the 2 pieces together so that you'd wind up with a whole piece. It's real important when you've got your piece of leather out there that you be able to place that pattern piece so that you get the most out of your leather and you've got every piece that you're going to need. What we're going to do is make another one of these. I've marked this one right, and that's another thing to remember. You need a right and a left. You don't need two rights. So I'm going to tape this down so I can cut around it and have the left side of this vest. I'm working with a pattern that comes from Tandy leather and is made for sewing with leather. It's not necessary that you buy a pattern that is just made for sewing with leather. Any fashion pattern that you find in your fabric store can be converted with just a simple little bit of reproduction like this. Some brown paper or some newspaper, anything that you have handy that you can make the extra pattern pieces will convert whatever pattern you've selected into a pattern for sewing with leather. Again, the only thing that you need to pay particular attention to is that when you're done, you have a right side and you have a left side. And so that you don't get confused when you're laying these out, go ahead and give yourself a break. Mark it so you don't put it upside down when you're ready to cut. Well, that was fairly simple because we had a simple pattern, but now that we've got our pattern prepared, we're ready to cut it out of leather. For the vest that we're making, we've selected a pig skin in a taupe color. As you can see, it's a nice size skin, and it's soft and supple. Before we put the pattern that we just prepared onto it, we're going to look it over for some imperfections. We'll notice that along this edge there's a hole. There's another little hole here, and we don't want those in our garment. Looking a little closer, we'll find right up here that there's a scar in the leather. These are not things to be concerned about. They don't mean that you don't have a good piece of leather. It means that it's a real piece of leather. It doesn't affect the durability of the leather. It's just something to be aware of because you don't particularly want that on the front of your garment. If it's in a seam allowance, it's no problem. If you cut around it, it's no problem either. The other thing in working with your leather that you need to be aware of is where the backbone of the animal fell. That's very much your key to what would be nap if you were working with fabric. If you bought your leather at a Tandy leather store, the store manager that sold it to you probably marked this backbone line in chalk. If he didn't, or when you're there, if he doesn't offer to and you'd like that, just request it. He's happy to help you. But this is your key as to how to lay your pattern out. This is the line that you want to line the arrows up with that are printed on your pattern that tell you how to line up grain. Also, in terms of nap, you want everything to go the same way as when you're working with corduroy. It's generally better with a suede if you figure out where the head of the animal was and you have the suede moving down from where your head is down the length of the garment. So now we're ready to put this pattern that we prepared on the skin, and we know where the imperfections are, so we're going to watch out for those. We're not going to get those onto our garment. I think that probably with a piece of pigskin like this, we're going to have plenty of room. One skin should do it. There shouldn't be any problem at all. We'll be able to miss this little scar up here. And we'll be able to miss these holes over on this side. Have lots of room. And we'll also have some good-sized pieces left over when we're done that we can use for a small purse, or covered buttons, or elbow patches for a sweater. Or I'm sure as you work with the leather, you'll find countless things that you can use these smaller pieces of leather for. What I'm doing to get ready to cut is taping the pattern pieces to the leather. There are other ways that you can do this besides tape. This is my favorite. I use the Scotch Magic tape because it doesn't leave any residue. Some of the other cellophane tapes will leave a residue on the leather, and you really don't want that. The main thing to remember to avoid is pins. You don't want to put pins in your leather. Any hole that you make in the leather is a hole forever. The Scotch tape peels off, and you've got everything left that you started out with. Once you get everything taped down, then you're ready to cut. Now that we have all the pieces taped down, we're ready to cut the leather. If this is the first time that you've cut into a piece of leather, this is the hardest part of the whole thing. At least it was for me the first time I made anything from leather. But you just need to take a deep breath and go for it. The main tool you need at this point to be successful is a good sharp pair of scissors. If you don't have them, you can get a pair of super shears at Tandy Leather Company, and they'll last a long time and they cut the leather beautifully. If you have a good sharp pair of dressmaking shears, use those. This is not a tough thing to cut. It's not going to ruin your scissors, and if you've got a good pair of scissors, they'll work fine. So now it's time, like I said, to take that big deep breath and cut into the leather. You want to have a nice, even cut, because when you get to constructing the garment, there will be less edge finishing than if you were sewing with fabric, and so these cut edges need to be as clean as you can make them. Once you've got the pattern pieces cut out and you're ready to move to the sewing machine to begin to sew your leather project, you need to make a couple of adjustments to your sewing machine. One is to set the stitch length. Because the leather is a little thicker and a little spongier than the fabrics that you're used to sewing, you need to lengthen the stitch length probably. Set it about 7 to 10 stitches per inch, with the shorter stitches being for the lighter weight leathers. The reason for this is because a tighter, smaller stitch will actually cut the leather and weaken the seam. So you want a longer stitch so that the seam will hold true and strong, and the leather will not be cut. The other adjustment that you need to make is in the presser foot tension. And on this machine, it's set with a little dial here. Every machine is different. This is a new, nice machine. It's not required that you go out and buy a special new sewing machine to sew with leather. Nearly any home sewing machine will accommodate leather. The garments that I'm wearing, I made on a real old Singer sewing machine that doesn't do anything but sew as straight as I can sew on it. And it took the leather very well. It didn't have any problem handling it. So I feel confident in telling you that your home sewing machine will be able to handle the leather. The other thing that you need to have to sew on the leather that's sort of special is a special needle that's made for sewing with leather. These are made by Singer. There are other manufacturers that make these needles. The difference between these needles and the needle that you're used to sewing with on your sewing machine is in the point. And the point of these leather needles is chiseled to a triangular point, so that as it makes each stitch, it actually cuts into the leather rather than punching a hole in it the way your other needles would. They come in a variety of sizes, 11 to 16. It pretty much relates to the same sizes that you're used to on your needles. You'd use the size 11 needle on the lambskin suede, the soft, lightweight suede. You'd use the 16 on the heavier leathers, like the Vogue garment split that we looked at earlier. Of course, if you're going to sew, you're going to have thread, and the thread that we recommend that you use for sewing on leather is a cotton-wrapped polyester. It's not not a specialty item. You can get it at any fabric store. It comes in a range of colors, so you shouldn't have any trouble matching it to the leather that you use. We recommend it rather than a cotton thread because it's more durable, rather than a nylon thread, again because it's durable, it doesn't break, and the nylon thread seems to pick up a little static sometimes. So the cotton wrap polyester is easy to find, and that's the one that's recommended. Now that you've seen the adjustments that you need to make to your sewing machine in order to sew on leather, our next step is to look at some of the techniques that you will need to know on your sewing machine. The vest that we're making today is from this pattern that I'm showing you. It has 4 different variations shown on the cover, and it's got a 2-piece front that you can use. You can vary the closures. You really can let your imagination guide you a little bit, even on a project this simple. This pattern is part of the growing line of patterns at the Tandy leather stores, where they're expanding their line of patterns that are designed specifically for sewing with leather. As I mentioned earlier, it's not necessary that you have a pattern specifically designed for leather. You can adapt any fashion pattern to it, but if it makes you feel more comfortable, there is a wide line at Tandy Leather, and it is getting larger all the time. The way we're going to make this vest today, as I keep saying, is the simplest way possible. We're not going to line this vest, although many of your garments that you make you will want to line. And a word of caution about that: if you're going to line your garment, use the best quality lining that you can get, because the leather will last virtually forever, and you want your lining to last as long as the vest does, and to hold up, or whatever garment you're making, to hold up and be in good shape. We're going to start by seaming the back yoke to the back. I've marked the centers and the pattern markings that you use to match things up. You can mark pretty much the same way you do on fabric. In the seam allowance, I've made a little slit to indicate the centers on these. If you've got a marking that's going to be on the body of the garment and you're going to use a marking pen or chalk, test the marking pen on a scrap of leather to be sure that it doesn't bleed through onto the surface of the leather. But we're going to stitch this, and then we'll see the treatment that replaces the trip to the ironing board. And that is, instead of pressing your seams flat, you're going to rubber cement them. And you want to use this sparingly. If you were in an area where you would be stitching over again, you wouldn't want so much rubber cement on your garment that it would gum up your needle. And so you're just going to run a thin little bit of cement there. And then you're going to take a mallet and pound that seam open. And a wooden mallet like this is relatively inexpensive. If you don't have one handy and you've already started your project, take a household hammer and put some of your scrap leather over the end of it with a rubber band so that that hammer won't mark your leather. And keep going. And that's the way your seam's going to look on the inside, and you didn't have to get up and go to the ironing board. you're ready for the next seam. And you can judge for yourself when it's appropriate to stop and open a seam up like you would if you were making a fabric garment. When you get to a place that you're going to sew over a seam and you want it open, stop and take care of it. So we're going to move on through the other seams to get this garment together, and then we'll see the edge finishing treatment that in this case is going to allow us to not line it and to still have nicely finished edges. Before we move to the edge finishing that I talked about, now that I've got all the seams done, I want to show you just how easy it is to top stitch on this leather. We're going to put a row of top stitching along the seam where the yoke joins the back. That's a normal place for that to happen, and it does look real nice, and it will make a nice detail on this very plain vest. And you can see how the needle just moves right along, no problem at all. Again, that's another reason, though, to be sparing in your use of the rubber cement, because especially if you're going to top stitch over it, you don't want to gum up your needle. But there we have it, a nice little row of top stitching, accenting the vest. And then we're going to finish all the cut edges on this vest this way. You know that if you were going to finish a cut edge on fabric, you would take 2 folds and then stitch over it. That inner fold isn't necessary with the leather because it doesn't ravel. So you're just going to fold up the seam allowance from the pattern and stitch on it. By this time in making your garment, you've determined that your machine is stitching properly. You've got the tension set, so the stitching line where your edge finishing will be top stitching on the outside of your garment. But with all the adjustments made properly, it's going to look real good. And it will be a simple treatment. It's easier than lining, and something that will just zip you right along. When we get done with that, we'll take a look at the front of this vest and decide what sort of closures we want to put on it. As we finish up this edge treatment, there are a couple of things I should mention. In making the leather give to go around the curves in the pattern, you need to make just a few small slits in the edge, within the seam allowance, and that'll let it have enough give to round the curve and your stitching to stay smooth and true. And then the other thing is that ordinarily when you finish a seam, you might back stitch to secure it at the end. With leather, you don't want to do that. If you back stitch, you're going to shred the leather. Every time the needle enters the leather, it makes a hole, and the more holes you have, the weaker the leather is and the more it will wear out. So you simply want to pull the thread to the inside and tie it off in a knot, and that secures your seam. Some people suggest you might want to put a little dot of glue there to hold it, but I've never found that necessary. A knot usually will work just fine. And that's the vest that we've been sewing on. It was a simple project, as I said. My sewing time on this vest has been well under an hour. Of course, if you made a more complicated project, you would expect to spend more time sewing on it. But for a very casual little vest that you would put on with a pair of jeans and an open neck shirt, something like that, this will be just fine. And some guy would probably be real glad to get it. This one we may leave without any closure at all because it is so casual. We would have our choice of buttons or snaps or several other kind of closures if we did want to close it off. Let me show you how that might look. This is, of course, a different vest, a lady's top, and it's got buttons covered in the same suede that the vest is made out of, and they're secured with buttons behind them, and that's, of course, recommended to keep the stitching from pulling through the leather and tearing the buttons off, and that way the buttons will last as long as your garment does. This vest is treated with bound buttonholes to complete the closure, and these are a very, fairly technical treatment for buttonholes. They are, of course, very pretty in leather, very good looking, and will last and are very nice. If you feel like your technical skills are not sufficient to make bound buttonholes, and if you don't make them in fabric, if you're intimidated by that, then you probably will be intimidated by them in leather. It's not necessary that you give up buttons if you don't feel like you can make a bound buttonhole. The buttonhole treatment on the top that I'm wearing is much simpler. I've simply stitched an oblong, a rectangle, stitching through the top suede and a piece of suede behind it as a reinforcement, and then made a slit the length of the button in the buttonhole. It wears well. It hasn't ever created any problem for me. So that's the simpler buttonhole treatment that I recommend if you're a little put off by bound buttonholes and feel like your skill is not quite there, or that the garment that you're making is not tailored enough to require that. Here's another vest that's very similar to the one that we worked on today. It's made by a variation of the pattern that we were using. This one has a pointed yoke in the back, and it's top stitched. This is made out of a smooth leather like our cabretta. It's got a closure treatment here that's got snaps on little tabs, so that it's just a different treatment. You could make the same sort of closure treatment with loops and buttons or frogs, or actually anything that your imagination can come up with. That's one of the beauties of making things yourself, is that you can use your own imagination. One other closure treatment that I wanted to mention is a zipper. It's not normally used in vests, although it can be. We put one in this pair of pants just to show you that it is possible to set a zipper into the suede. It stitches just as well as any of the other details that you would want to put in. Of course, there are a lot of patterns on the market these days for skirts and pants that use a placket closure and avoid the issue of zippers entirely, so you might want to choose those instead. And as you're selecting a pattern for the project that you're going to make, steer away from anything that you would hesitate to make out of fabric. If your skill level is not sufficient to make you comfortable with it in fabric, then you're going to have trouble in leather. But anything that you'd be comfortable making in fabric, you could also make in leather. Well, that pretty much sums up the closures that we could use in treating this vest or treating any other garment that we were making. Another vest I wanted to show you is this one for a lady. It's got a little more detailing on it than the vest that we worked on earlier. It's got pockets that are set in with a little band at the top of them, and it's got gathers in the back above this band. And the reason I wanted to show you this is so that you can see how easy it is to work with this leather. It gathers without any problem. It drapes very nicely and hangs very smooth. It's a very soft leather, not at all heavy or stiff. We made a matching skirt for that vest, and we put an elastic waistband on this skirt. This one is done with 2 rows of elastic and a row of stitching in between. It makes a nice finished waistband. The skirt has pockets, and the hem on the skirt is held up with the same rubber cement that we used to open the seams out on the vest that I made earlier. I have another vest here that's very different in its look. It's also for a lady. It uses the Santa Fe look that's so popular and incorporates the natural edge of the skins. It makes it easier for you to sew to because you don't have to finish those edges, but they are used in the design, giving it a natural look. It's decorated with a few beads. And of special interest are the ties here in the front. They're made from strips of this very soft chamois leather that are braided so that they will last for the life of the garment. They won't wear out or shred like they might if it was just a single thickness of this extremely soft leather. And here we have another project, and this one began its life in a department store as a plain white sweater. One of our Tandy leather store managers put this together with some remnants of leather. There would probably be enough remnants left from the vest that we made earlier in this tape to complete this sweater. It's got an overlay of leather that follows the natural, the raglan sleeve line that came on the sweater. It's stitched over the sweater with a bound-on edge facing and a fringe trim that's further decorated with wooden beads. And this treatment is also carried out on the sleeve so that you have a really custom look sweater that you really just did a small project on to make it more individual and creative. And then we have something that was not a small project, but look at the results. This is a classic Western jacket with fringe made out of deerskin that's so soft you just want to touch it. While we're looking at this fringe, let me give you a little tip from Tandy about making fringe. If you'll get shelf paper that has a sticky back, peel the backing off of it and lay that on the back side of the leather piece that you're wanting to fringe, then you'll have enough stiffness to the leather to hold a good edge. If you look for a piece of shelf paper that's got a checkerboard pattern to it, you'll already have some lines there to serve as guides when you're cutting the fringe. And the super shears, or the sharp shears that you use to cut leather, will cut a nice even fringe then, and then you can just peel off that shelf paper backing and you'll have fringe that catches the wind and moves and looks really nice. A couple of other project ideas here. These were made from patterns. Tandy Leather has similar patterns. I'm sure you can find other kinds of patterns for projects like this in your craft stores too. These are some purses that were put together out of small pieces of soft suede. You can see how you could invest in a little leather and come up with projects, gift ideas. You could probably give something to nearly everybody on your Christmas list using up your leathers. These purses, this purse could be made without the shoulder strap and be a nice clutch. This is a good tote size. Here we have a small, like an eyeglass case or a cigarette case. And also a belt that uses a closure I didn't talk to you about before, and that's a Velcro closure, which is just almost a perfect closure for a leather belt of this type. And while we're talking about belts, let me show you these two snakeskin belts. This is made from a python skin, and since snakeskin is a thin skin, it has been adhered to a thick piece of cowhide to give it stability, and it's then shaped and edge finished and closed with a little brass stud when it comes through the slit. A very modern looking belt. Here's a little bit more classic Western belt. This is made from a piece of whip snake, also again adhered to a thick, stiff piece of cowhide and finished off with a Western buckle set. And as if that weren't enough, when you have made your leather garments, then you can also add some decor items to your home. This is a pillow made from pigskin that has a quilted effect, a shell shape, a good looking item to dress up your sofa. And we also have this unusual placemat and napkin ring set that are made from pigskin also, and they're decorated with holes that are punched in it's 2 layers of pigskin, and the top layer has had holes punched in it before it's adhered to the bottom layer. These holes are punched with a rotary punch like this. It comes with a various size punches on it so that you can come up with, I'm sure, some really interesting designs if you decide to be creative in that direction. Many people are deriving a great deal of their recreational entertainment from hobbies where they recreate the past. This young man has spent many hours creating this authentic period costume. He's hand-sewn deer skins into this outfit, and then he's made designs with beads, which are also hand-sewn to the leather, all down the sleeve of this outer garment he's wearing. That design is with tiny little seed beads, and then the rest of the garment is also decorated with horsehair trim. This is an authentic period costume, an award winner, I'm sure. I showed you several types of leather in the garments and the projects we looked at earlier. I need to say a few words to you about the care of that leather. And different kinds of leather require different kinds of care. The smooth surface leathers, like the cabretta that we looked at, you'd want to clean with a cleaner like Lexol. It's pH balanced. It will remove any kind of spots or stains from the surface of the leather, and it won't remove the oils that would make the leather then get dry and crack. After you've removed any stains that might be troubling you, then you would want to treat it with a conditioner like this Lexol conditioner, which would restore the luster to your leather and protect it from any further wear or abuse. We hope you wouldn't abuse your leather. The suedes would require a different kind of care. Your best tool for caring for your suedes would be a suede brush. This will remove any kind of surface dirt that you might collect on the leather, and will also fluff the nap back up and make it look just as soft and luxurious as it did when it was new. If there is a small stain or spot on the suede, you would want to use a suede stone on that. You just rub the area that you're treating with the suede stone, let it sit a few minutes so that it will pull any of the oil or grease out of the spot, and then brush the residue off with the suede brush again. Other than that, if there's larger areas of the garment that you feel have collected some body oils and you want to freshen them up just a little bit, we recommend that you sprinkle it with cornmeal and let that sit for a few hours and brush that off with a suede brush. Many people are concerned when they think of buying leather or wearing leather garments because of the expense, and one of the expenses that they worry about is the professional cleaning that is required. Occasionally your garment will need to be cleaned by a professional cleaner, and in that case we recommend that you take it to someone that specializes in cleaning leather. He will know how to take care of that leather and return it to you in good condition. But if you use some of these other remedies, you can avoid that expense a great deal of the time and actually treat your leather better, because the more it is cleaned, the more the natural oils are pulled out of the leather, and the more likely it is to dry and crack and show its age. Once you have your garments completed and you're wearing them and enjoying them, we hope, there are a couple of other things that you need to remember. We recommend that you hang those garments, if possible, on a padded hanger. The wire hangers tend to push the shoulders out of shape or stretch a seam, leave a mark on the leather that a padded hanger would not. And so if that's at all possible, use a padded hanger to hang your garments, and never hang them in the sunlight. Sunlight will dry the leather out, it will fade color, it will age the garment ahead of its time. And so to get the longest life possible out of your garment, you need to be sure to avoid the sunlight when you're hanging it and storing it. Another concern that people have about the expense of sewing with leather is the initial expense of purchasing your leather. We did a survey this week here in Fort Worth and called a local fabric store where Ultra Suede, the imitation leather, is selling at $55 a yard. This is the fabric that is designed to be the most like real suede. Our genuine pigskin sells for $2.25 a square foot, which relates to that yard of Ultra Suede, which at about $30. So as you can tell, you can figure out for yourself, the imitation is not, in this case, less expensive than the real thing. Let me show you how we go about figuring how many square feet of leather you need to buy when you've got a pattern that tells you how many yards of fabric that you need. Here's a chart we've prepared to demonstrate how you would go about figuring the amount of leather to buy. The patterns that you're used to dealing with from the fabric store generally tell you on the back of them how many yards of fabric you need to buy in varying widths to make the garments that are pictured on the front of the pattern. We've taken as an example here a pattern that would require 3 yards of 36-inch fabric. We're going to multiply that 3 by 9, which is the number of square feet there are in a yard of 36-inch fabric. And then to that number we're going to add 15%, which allows for any of the irregularities in the skin, the blemishes, the little spots that you would want to avoid in laying out your pattern so that you'd get the best looking garment. And then when you add that 15% to the number you arrived at by multiplying 3 times 9, the total then is the number of square feet that you're going to need to purchase in leather to make the garment that you've chosen. After you've selected the pattern that you're going to make your garment by, you can take it with you to the merchant where you're going to buy your leather. If you're going to buy it from a Tandy leather store, I encourage you to do that because the store manager there wants to help you be successful with your project. It will help you figure out how many square feet of leather you need if you've had a problem with that, and will help you select the skins that will make the garment that you want to make the best possible. While you're there, you want to be sure that you buy all the skins that you're going to need for your garment because it's important that they all come from the same dye lot. The colors will vary just a little bit, the same way they do with yarns when you're doing a needlework project. At the time you buy your leather, your Tandy leather store manager will also give you this booklet. It comes free with the purchase of a skin, and this is the book that got me started sewing with leather. This is where I learned what I know. It will help you, I'm sure. It will give you a written guide to go by for some of the techniques that you've seen in the video and some illustrations that will help you as you go about sewing your garment. So with this information and the confidence that we hope we've inspired in you with this video, we hope that you will go out and get some leather, get a pattern, get started sewing with leather, and we wish you good luck, and we're sure that you will be successful sewing with leather.